G'day guys, not particularly great lighting because it is in the wee hours of the morning. So as I've been looking on the events and coming up in April, what caught my eye was the fact that there's been talk about the National Guard is going to be deployed along the Great American Eclipse route. So that's basically the area that stretches from Mexico across the southern states, and apparently even includes Canada. I'm not quite sure how that works, but I suppose, it works along that kind of south west to northeast corridor, basically. So again, because of all this influx of people, they're going to have to deploy the National Guard to deal with all these people. People have been told to stock up on food because there may be power systems may be overloaded because they can't able to cope with it. Which let's think about this even before there isn't any particular crisis. That's a huge indictment about what's happening to America if their national infrastructure isn't able to cope with the fact that people are on the move. Because people go on holidays, it does actually happen. But what also caught my attention is the fact that Alaska, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, and I think there's quite a few that are missing, are also all deploying to the Mexican border, and there doesn't seem to be any real reason why that's actually taking place. These were things that were being set in motion before even the eclipse, and they're saying it's because of the Mexican crisis. But what crisis? This literally, we're looking at large movements of bodies of troops, actually, and you carry them a bit further, you go to New York, and guess what? They've deployed the National Guard there, 750 to combat on a spate of crime. Now, to put that in context, I've been I've been of late watching the reruns of Barney Miller, and this is a sitcom based in the New York detective rooms during the Reagan period, and it's sort of on the verge when New York was about to kind of basically descend into becoming like a second Detroit, and like things were really, really, really bad. They didn't deploy the National Guard then, and they didn't deploy the National Guard. I think, well, actually, I'll hold off on that one because I don't only say the things you know. But the point is, there isn't any real. That's it. They deploy the National Guard because there's muggings on the subways. What the? So, yeah, I'm going to keep looking at this stuff, but it's and you got to be a bit careful because the old phenomenon, if you start looking for something, you start to see it. But I've never seen in my 30 years of anything like this in terms of this mass deployment of the National Guard, all happening simultaneously and all across the states across where this basically eclipse is going to be occurring. Not all of them are saying, oh, we're doing it because of the eclipse. They're doing it for reasons which are pretty bloody spurious. It's just odd. And it's like, again, I might have mentioned beforehand about the series of states of observatories that have actually been closing down. It'd be really interesting to actually track those, see which of the observatories were closed and see if they, again, fall in on that line. Because there's something very, very odd going on here. Now, we obviously know that we know about APEP, the NASA tests where they're basically going to be firing rockets into the eclipse, which is basically to figure out how the eclipse affects the ionosphere. What they're not really talking about is the fact of the New York, basically how this relates to CERN. Is the best way to look at it is to go and look at the New York eclipse, or the report on the May 1919 eclipse in the USA covered by the New York Times, which that eclipse, because of its the many factors that come together, basically created a staggering phenomenon which just blew scientists' minds away and basically proved the principles of Einstein's relative theory of relativity. So again, very, very interesting. Again, also we look at the area where we see that another thing I've gone and looked at today is that the area which is in Sinaloa, which is the area famous for the drug cartels in Mexico, but it's also the area which has had a solar solar observatory since basically the late 1700s or early 1800s, but for a very long time. And it's sort of that particular Solar Observatory is, said that NASA's going to be basically there, having a team there to also observe the eclipse, which they're very interested in. But what we also discover is that that area is actually also tied into the CERN research. And again, I've got a couple of bits and links and feed, and I'll flush that out a bit more when I've in the hours of daylight when I can see what the hell I'm actually doing. But yeah, it's very, very curious. And again, I sort of missed one of the small points of the heraldry I actually missed was that we see that whole Mexican, the Mexican, eagle and the serpent, which is again related in the story of APPP, which is the national emblem of Mexico, which goes back to its times. It's a reference to Mexico's period when they were linked to the Aztecs and their worship of the sun gods. And you'll find that again, that appears in the Sonola's heraldry as well, again, the eagle and the serpent. So just, very interesting, because obviously this has been something that's happened across the area in the past, and it's made an impact upon the mythology or the mythos of that region. But, within those mythos, you will find clues in terms of what's likely to occur, in the coming next 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe nothing will happen. At the end of the day, I don't have a crystal ball. I just turn around and see what I see and make make deductions. But it is clear that this is a big bloody deal. There has been billions of dollars spent on this particular project, and now, as I said, we find it out that they're actually deploying the National Guard. So I'm just going to keep having a little look, because the more I look at this, the more I start to go, what the hell? And the other things I'm very curious to see about is the beginning of the primaries. I believe that's in April 2024. I think stock markets are very interesting too, because there's been lots of talk with, and these are, when I say lots of talk, I'm talking about the mainstream sources saying they're talking about a black swan event in April. And then again, you may remember that guys like Pierre Field and a few other people have actually gone out and been buying up gold, and in Field's case, stocking it in his little underground bunker in Wanaka. He's recently joined, I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the guy that actually was sort of credited with coming out with BlackBerry. He's been cruising around New Zealand for the last month or so, and he's heavily involved in the whole concept of Bitcoin gold. And again, that's very interesting, because we see, Bitcoin is taking a huge surge at the moment, and lots of people jumping on that bandwagon. But I'm also kind of curious to see what actually happens. I mean, in terms of Bitcoin is a substance which is related to the, it lives and dies on the electric grid line. No electricity, no Bitcoin. Bang, end of story. Lots of money to be lost. So that'll be interesting. And of course, what this all bears in mind for me is that if the electric grid does fail, and we see that electric isn't working because, again, things like, China controls the supply for nickel and lithium, who is the most likely person to actually stand in and stands to gain from all this? And I would put it to you that it's the nuclear industry, and I'd also put it to you that if you pay attention to the stocks at the moment, uranium is going like a skyrocket. When we look at the whole, I always say the joke, like, I have no time for the woke, I have no time for the wake. I find reactionary extremists or either camp to be just vile and just, it's narrow-mindedness, But what I find interesting is that when you look at sort of the woke and like, oh yes, we love our petrol heads, brum, 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 and like, who's got the money in the petrol industry? Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's big companies like BlackRock. And then we turn around and we look at the old wakesters, drinking little cappuccinos and pretending that they're hipsters. Hipsters. Who's the biggest guy behind that? Well, that's it's BlackRock. And ultimately, at the end of the day, however, is that they're having poured on this money, which if you actually again look at the stock, you actually see that BlackRock's been losing money. They've been pushing it, and people have been following, because, BlackRock's into it, they must be into it. But BlackRock's actually been losing money. And the only thing I can think about you doing this is it's like they've sucked in, Jacinda went off and spent $2 billion onto the electric. So everything must be electric. Australian senators have done exactly the same thing. Bang! Suddenly the electric grid goes down. Oh my God, electric grid's not all it's cracked out to be. Oh, what are we going to do to replace it in the place that fossil fuels are killing? Oh, we'll have to go nuclear. And I kind of think that's been the whole game plan the whole way through. Craig Rogers, Otago University, is been doing a lot of research, being paid large amounts of money to actually study the impacts or the vulnerability of the electrical grid line here in New Zealand. one of the things he's actually pointed out is that the electromagnetic, could bring it down. And he talks basically about a system that America sort of developed this, and I wish I had my notes here, but it is, bear in mind, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. America's developing a system which is like an early warning system. And yes, it's an early warning system, and yes, it is tied into HARP. And the whole idea is that in the event that the northern hemisphere got Arctic got attacked by the Russians using nuclear weapons, which basically send off a system which crashes, where the nukes blow up and they create an EMP effect. But this system actually counters that. So basically, when the nukes go off, they cause massive stimulation in the upper atmosphere of the total electric count. This system would actually then turn around and creates an arc bridge, and it displaces that system. So that effectively, what happens is that no, they don't get a blackout in North America, but we get it. What Craig Rogers points out is that this system is one of the side effects of this particular system that's been set up, is that yes, it can actually cause blackouts elsewhere. Now, that wasn't necessarily directly related into his power notes, because his research into the vulnerability of New Zealand's electrical grid system. I have written about that on my website beforehand, but it is definitely he has talked about this, and I have quoted about this beforehand as well. So these are the things that I'm thinking about in terms of as we're moving. There's been a lot of indications for a while now that the system has been set up to be crashed. And that will allow, of course, basically the people that are all sort of protected to be last man standing. They've got the resources, they're already ready for it. We're all crying there in tears, going, "Oh, we're crying," and then they turn around and come and save us, but with a price. All this is speculation, but I do think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the next 2 to 3 weeks, beginning from April 1st, April Fool's Day, and basically leading into the end of April. We also have a lot of legislation out there in the edges, but we'll just leave it. I think that's enough for you guys all to bend your heads around. Have a good morning, good night, wherever you are. Make sure you've got your basics, which you should always have anyway. Bandages, 2 weeks worth of canned food, bottles of water. These are just things which, in the event, earthquake, flooding, whatever, if you have them, then you're prepared. And if you don't, then you're going to be, there's no point being interested in all the stuff if you actually haven't got taking some responsibility for yourself. Anyway, have a good night, good morning, wherever you are, and may the force be with you all.